Meanwhile, Deon considered how to respond to the incubus, thinking he didn't exactly have pressing matters to attend to. Heen approached him and explained earnestly that he wished to repay Deon's help by giving him a tour of the garden and offering herbs that relieved fatigue. He knew Deon was busy as a squad leader and said he would understand if there was no time. Intrigued, Deon asked if there really was a garden in the Demon King's castle. In such a grim, oppressive place, the idea seemed unlikely. Heen bowed in apology for the delayed introduction, then formally greeted Deon and explained that he was the gardener responsible for all the plants in the castle. Deon was mildly surprised to learn that even in the demonic kingdom, such a peaceful profession existed. He rubbed his chin and smiled at the thought. A garden, flowers, greenery, fresh air, it sounded like exactly the refuge he needed. He asked if he could see it. Heen's face lit up, assuring him he could be trusted, and pointed the way, inviting the commander of the Zero Squad to follow. Deon thought he could finally breathe a sigh of relief. Soon, they entered the garden. Heen gestured toward the many flowers with a smile, proudly presenting them. Deon was delighted. This was exactly what he had hoped for. With a broad smile, he remarked on the beauty of the place. Heen scratched the back of his head sheepishly, and Deon inhaled the refreshing scent of greenery and fresh air, deciding to take a walk. But as he did, a predatory plant suddenly opened its jaws wide. When Deon drew near, saliva dripped onto his head. He leapt back in fright just as the plant's jaws snapped shut, narrowly avoiding a bite. Clutching his chest, Deon struggled to process what had just happened. Heen rushed over, scolding the plant in a firm, almost threatening tone, warning it against attacking Sir Eret and asking if it needed another lesson. The plant immediately calmed. Turning to Sir Eret with an apologetic smile, Heen explained that the plant had likely just been happy to see him. Deon stayed silent, biting his lip nervously. He was already taking back his earlier thoughts about weak demons. Heen was clearly as dangerous as any of them. Looking around, he realized the garden appeared normal only at first glance. Inside, it was filled with plants like this. He needed to get out. Heen called out to him with concern, and Deon apologized, explaining that an urgent matter required his attention. Heen, upset, asked if that was truly the case. Heen remarked that there were far more fascinating plants inside the garden. Deon grew tense and insisted that this was not what he wanted. He needed to head to the training ground. The incubus reached for his hand and asked if he meant the training ground. Deon, now excited, quickly pulled his hand away, explaining that he needed to see his squad immediately. Having been apart from them for so long, he felt compelled to meet them without delay. He hurriedly left the garden, bid farewell, and extended his hand. Heen reached toward him, seemingly wanting to say something, but then let his hand drop. Convinced by Deon's urgency, he sighed, concluding that he truly must be busy. A nearby carnivorous plant nudged Heen, and he gently touched it, asking if it, too, was sad about Deon's departure, if it thought he might return. The plant licked its lips, and Heen smiled, saying he wanted to see Deon again and prepare a gift for him. Since Deon seemed to have a fondness for plants, Heen decided to present him with the most charming one from the garden. He hoped this would bring Deon and Sir Eret even closer. Meanwhile, Deon muttered that he still felt shivers. It had been foolish to think anyone normal could be found in the Demon King's castle. Entering the corridor, he made his way toward a room, reasoning that staying there would be safest given the dangers outside. However, he suddenly stopped, admitting to himself that this was only an excuse he truly needed to see Squad Zero. Out of embarrassment from the chaos he caused while drunk, he had been postponing the meeting. Yet the Demon King and Ed had continued to press him to go. He recalled the words of his deputy, clutching his chest as he realized they had not been wrong. Since he was already outside, he needed to at least show himself to his squad. They would still make the effort for him. After today's traumatic events, he was no longer afraid to face them. Soon, Deon arrived at the training ground. Looking around, he remarked to himself that there seemed to be no one there. He walked to the center, thinking he had fulfilled his task simply by showing up and could now leave. But he reminded himself that problems could not always be solved by avoiding them. He began to wonder how strong Squad Zero truly was. As he wandered, he looked for a place to sit and wait. Noticing a rack of training swords, he wondered if they practiced with wooden weapons. Picking one up, he gave it a swing, recalling that during the monster attack he had been so disoriented that he remembered nothing. He thought this might be a perfect opportunity to test himself, but the moment he lifted the sword, his arm immediately dropped under its weight. He tried again but failed, marveling at how heavy it was. His face flushed with embarrassment, and with an awkward smile, he admitted to himself that if he could barely lift a wooden sword, he had no chance with an iron one. Resting the sword's tip on the floor, he leaned on the hilt, sighing in frustration at his own weakness. He resolved to stick to a dagger for now. At that moment, several demons entered the training ground. Hearing their surprised gasps, Deon turned toward the entrance and saw Squad Zero staring at him in shock, their mouths open in disbelief. He wondered when they had arrived and hoped they had not seen too much. However, his stance with the sword only fueled further misunderstanding in their eyes. It was a striking pose that inspired admiration. They approached him eagerly, greeting him and asking if he was feeling well. Since he had been absent for so long, they had begun to worry. They explained that they were currently on a break and had not been slacking off at all. Deon quickly tossed the sword aside, shivering nervously as the squad members drew closer, smiling and praising him for being truly inimitable during their last mission. Deon wondered what was wrong with him. He spread his arms to the sides and, in an attempt to quiet the squad's endless admiration, asked them to calm down, assuring them that he was fine. At his words, the members of his squad settled somewhat. One of them whispered that he still looked tired, and another replied that he always said that. Deon looked at them with mild displeasure, thinking about what they were whispering. One squad member insisted he wasn't okay, saying he had pushed himself too hard last time, and that they would protect their commander no matter what. They wiped their tears away, while Deon, puzzled by their concerned stares, decided not to dwell on it. He sighed heavily, resolving to finish his task and leave. Turning away from them, he explained that he had intended to come immediately after the mission but, due to various circumstances, had been unable to. He apologized and acknowledged that they had done well last time. Usually, he preferred to keep a certain distance, but this time he decided to give them some encouragement. Once training began, he planned to sit and observe. Picking up his sword, he prepared to leave the platform, saying he had only come to tell them this. He was certain they would have managed without his involvement. Within the ranks of Squad Zero, however, a stranger sent by the Emperor had gone unnoticed. Silently, the man drew his sword and approached Deon. Deon told the squad they could continue training, but his words stopped abruptly when his legs suddenly gave way. He began to fall, panic setting in as he cursed inwardly. If he fell, it would be humiliating. He needed to react quickly. In an instant, Deon placed his sword on the floor, using it for support as he knelt, steadying himself. At that exact moment, the stranger swung his sword with the intent to kill but missed. Deon was unexpectedly fortunate that his leg had given out at just the right time. The attacker, shocked, demanded to know how Deon had dodged. Slowly, Deon turned to glare at him, his expression shifting from cold to surprised and confused. The squad snapped out of their stupor and rushed forward, calling to their commander to see if he was all right, demanding to know who the intruder was. Deon's thoughts raced. Had this man just tried to attack him? The situation was dangerous. He turned to escape, but in the motion, his elbow struck the attacker squarely in the face, knocking him down. Deon himself was startled by what he had done as blood spattered from the man's mouth and nose. The stranger covered his mouth, coughing harshly, while Deon stared at him in confusion, wondering if he had truly struck him. When the man caught his breath, he called Deon a freak. Lowering his hand, he then accused him of being the demon Eret. Something about the man's expression made Deon take a closer look. He saw no demonic features at all. Could he really be human? And if so, how had he gotten into the Demon King's castle? Members of Squad Zero ran to their commander, asking again if he was all right. The man cursed under his breath, and Deon realized that if Squad Zero didn't know him, he must be an outsider. The stranger began to get up, clutching his nose, muttering that he needed to run. But he froze when he saw Deon raise his sword. Cursing again, the man met Deon's steady, unshakable gaze. In a swift motion, Deon struck him on the head, thinking that if he let him escape, he would be inviting danger upon himself. The man collapsed unconscious, and Deon tossed a wooden sword beside his fallen body. He silently stretched his wrists, and after a brief pause, turned to his subordinates. In a calm but firm voice, he ordered them to report the incident to the king and to have the man locked away. They followed his instructions without hesitation. Without another word, he left the platform and headed toward the exit. A demonist from his squad spoke with a note of sorrow, saying that Sir Irat must be disappointed in them. The demon agreed, adding that they had allowed an outsider to infiltrate the training site and that, ironically, it was their own commander who had apprehended him. Another squad member remarked that the intruder's movements had been astonishingly smooth, fast, and precise. Sir Irat had strolled leisurely, yet dodged the attack with incredible speed, counterattacking almost effortlessly. He had caught the outsider in mid-escape and taken control of the situation instantly. One of the squad members, who had tied up the outsider, reflected that the status of Squad Zero's commander was so high that his mere presence overshadowed the entire team. With determination, he clenched his fist and pressed his lips together, vowing to train harder until he earned recognition. Yet even with that resolve, he acknowledged that the commander's level was beyond comprehension unreachable, even to the point of not being worthy of touching his fingertips. Energized, he urged his comrades that there was no time to waste. They must begin training immediately and continue until they became worthy allies of Sir Irat. From this day forward, there would be no rest. Meanwhile, Deon was returning to his quarters. Glancing at his bruised wrist, he flexed it experimentally, muttering that he must have overstrained it while wielding the wooden sword. Placing his hands behind his head, he hummed to himself and decided that, after successfully completing such an irritating task, he had earned some rest. Time passed, and Deon awoke from a deep, satisfying sleep. Sitting up, he wondered aloud what time it was. Suddenly, a familiar voice spoke asking if he had slept well, and remarking that he must have been exhausted to rest so peacefully. Deon turned his head and saw the king seated casually in a chair, sipping tea with a faint smile. Puzzled, Deon hesitated before asking if he was dreaming. The Demon King assured him that this was no dream. Startled, Deon exclaimed, asking what His Majesty was doing there. The king set down his cup, stood, and apologized for disturbing him so soon after waking. He then asked if Deon could spare him some time. Rising from his bed, Deon approached, wondering if he had somehow caused trouble. Whatever it was, he wanted no part of it. But since the king had come and waited for him, perhaps the matter was urgent. Suspecting the visit had something to do with the outsider, Deon asked if that was the case. Placing a hand on Deon's shoulder, the Demon King confirmed it and suggested they go together. They descended into the dungeon, where a guard greeted them. Deon glanced around, realizing it was an underground prison. The outsider must be kept here, but why bring him? Had the man spoken ill of him, or was this meant to serve as a warning? The king ordered the guard to open a cell, and she complied instantly, saluting before stepping aside. The heavy door swung open, revealing a man drenched in blood, his hands bound tightly to a post. At the sound of their arrival, the prisoner looked up wearily, gritting his teeth. Deon and the king stepped inside. Taking in the prisoner's battered state, Deon thought the scene was horrific. What had they done to him that night? The Demon King crouched beside the man, seized him by the hair, and pointed at him. "Irat, look at this wretch. Doesn't he seem familiar to you?" The man winced in pain. Deon asked what he meant, But before the king could answer, the prisoner roared, demanding to be released so he could finish them off. The king ignored the threat, turning instead to Deon. "This man," the king said, "possesses brute strength enough to defeat a demon despite being human. His power continues to grow." He studied the prisoner's face closely once again. Deon began to suspect something. He wondered if it was possible that this man was a hero. A true hero, when faced with certain death in battle against the Demon King, had two possible choices: self-destruct, dealing massive damage to the Demon King nearby, or sacrifice their life to spread their power across the continent, creating a hero fragment. Most heroes chose the second path, fearing that their powers might vanish otherwise. The Emperor would collect these fragments. Those who carried a fragment of a hero's power within themselves were secretly referred to as heroes as well, though officially only those who had earned such recognition through exceptional achievements could hold the title and claim immortal fame. Deon frowned, thinking all of this was nothing more than a way for the Empire to exploit power. The Demon King released a prisoner and scoffed that it was hardly amusing. They had sent a hero into the demonic kingdom. He grinned, saying it was far more accurate to call the man a hero candidate, or perhaps just the remnant of a hero. Inwardly, Deon agreed. If the man were truly an officially recognized hero of the Empire, he would not be this weak. Still, he was a hero nonetheless, and it would be wrong to think of him as a disposable pawn. The Emperor would never send a hero candidate here without a purpose. What was he planning? Something shifted in Deon's demeanor. He turned toward His Majesty. Brushing the dust from his hands, he asked what the matter was. Then, seeing the determination in his subordinate's gaze toward the prisoner, Deon requested permission to speak with the man alone. Passing the prisoner, Deon lightly tapped him on the shoulder and said he would be waiting outside the cell. His subordinate agreed, remarking on his quickness. Deon suspected there was no message at all. Perhaps the real target was only him. But why? What was he thinking? The prisoner looked up at Deon with anger in his eyes, calling him by his true name and accusing him of being a traitor. Deon was momentarily taken aback. The man shouted that he had earned the Emperor's trust, becoming a hero of the Empire, only to betray them and defect to the demons. Deon thought to himself that at least the man could. But Deon didn't let him finish. Covering his face with his palm, he burst into laughter, saying he never would have imagined delivering a message in such a way. The man was confused. Deon, nearly laughing to tears, asked if he was supposed to be a bargaining chip. The hero retorted that this was a lie. He had been given an important mission to eliminate a traitor to His Imperial Majesty. Deon sat opposite him, denying it. The proof, he said, was that the man called him a traitor at all. Extending a hand toward him, Deon asked what sin he had committed to be discarded so easily. The prisoner became uneasy, asking what he meant. Deon placed his hands on the man's trembling shoulders, stating that His Majesty was fully aware of everything. The man clenched his teeth, about to speak, but Deon silenced him, leaning in to whisper that he knew the true reason for his presence in the demon realm and his real purpose. Stepping back with a smile, Deon added that the man had no idea about himself. Slowly, the prisoner began to grasp the meaning. Deon asked why His Majesty had sent him to the dangerous demonic kingdom. Was it really just to eliminate a traitor? The man's body trembled. Lowering his head in disbelief, he quietly asked if His Majesty had truly abandoned him. Deon rose and moved toward the exit. Waving casually, he told the prisoner he had time to think before dying. As he left the cell, a furious voice shouted after him, cursing the Emperor, swearing vengeance, vowing to kill him no matter what. Deon dismissed it as shallow devotion, a waste of breath. The Demon King, reading his expression, asked if he was finished. It seemed his curiosity was satisfied. "So," he asked, "what should we do with this scumbag? Perhaps put him to use somehow." Deon approached and replied that the decision was His Majesty's, though he personally thought it best to simply kill the man. The king narrowed his eyes slightly. "That's your decision then?" he asked, before waving it off. It doesn't matter. I'll decide. He smiled faintly and added, but in return, you'll have to do something for me. Deon remained silent, his expression one of clear dissatisfaction as he raised an eyebrow. The king then spoke, explaining that the first attachment had requested immediate assistance. When Deon asked if this was at the front line, the king confirmed and added that they had reported encountering not a candidate hero, but a genuine hero. Hearing this, Deon once again fell silent, his face blank. The Demon King then asked, though it was more of a statement that Deon already knew heroes and demons did not get along. Deon stayed quiet, thinking that if the hero on the front line was not just a disposable fragment sent by the Emperor, but a true hero, then the average demon would be no match for him. The king smiled and remarked that he was also curious about the Emperor's intentions in sending both a fragment and a real hero at the same time. Stepping closer, the king clapped Deon on the shoulder and said that this was precisely why he wanted him to handle the mission. Deon's expression darkened, shifting sharply as if he had just been jolted awake. He wondered in surprise how he had even ended up here. The king moved toward the stairs, stating that preparations for departure were necessary and they needed to leave immediately. Deon looked around in confusion, unable to grasp what had just happened. When the king's words registered, Deon asked, dumbfounded, where they were going. Soon after, it was time to depart. Leaning against the wall at the palace entrance, Deon waited for his carriage to be prepared. He crossed his arms, closed his eyes, and, with tears welling up, cursed silently. He recalled following the king into an underground prison, only to later find himself sent once again to some terrifying place. It felt as though he kept slipping in and out of reality, each time on the verge of losing his mind. He thought of it as an illness. What he could remember was that someone was going to die, and that the Demon King had ordered him to the front lines. His deputy called out, waving with a smile, and announced that the preparations for departure were complete. Deon looked up, nodded, and replied that he understood. Descending the stairs, he reminded himself that a new hero had appeared. Since he was heading there, he might as well see this hero's face to calm his thoughts. After all, he was curious. Ed watched him leave, noting that while Deon had satisfied some of his desires by exterminating monsters, it was unlikely to be enough to truly fulfill him. Ed had heard of terrible events unfolding at the front line, yet Deon's face seemed almost joyful, as though he were heading on vacation. Just as Deon was about to climb into the carriage, a voice called out to him. It was Rainal, sitting on her staff and hovering above the ground. She waved with a smile, saying she had missed him dearly. Deon turned, speaking her name in a questioning tone. Ed bowed to her in respect. Rainal descended and approached, while Deon eyed her suspiciously and asked what she was doing there. As she admired him, Deon reflected that despite her charming appearance, she radiated powerful demonic energy second only to the Demon King. Appearances could no longer fool him. Rainal, remembering her purpose, fumbled in her pocket and said she had heard of his mission to the front lines. She took out a pendant and handed it to him, explaining that this was why she wanted to give it to him. Deon's thoughts turned wary. Why was she giving him this? It felt suspicious, and he felt he should not accept it. Rainal then told him she had placed a protective charm on the pendant enough to prevent his death at least once. Even if it was not much, she wanted to help him in any way she could. Deon didn't let her speak and immediately grabbed the pendant, thinking it was so wonderful. He looked at it with a smile, assuming she was giving it to him. Naturally, he should accept it. Why look for a reason to refuse a gift? That would be rude. While he was lost in this thought, he didn't notice that he had patted Rainal on the head. Realizing this, he froze, nervous that he had done it unconsciously. His hand trembled as he opened it, but Rainal only giggled contentedly. The ribbon of her bow spontaneously rose. Startled, Deon quickly pulled his hand back. Is this a living, moving thing? A ribbon? No, it's a tentacle. He found it unpleasant, but since Rainal didn't look upset, he sighed in relief. Still shaken, he let the matter drop. His deputy then bowed to Rainal and thanked her, confessing tearfully that although he knew Sir Erat was strong, he had been worried about him after the previous battle. Now, thanks to her attendant, he could finally breathe easy. Touched by his words, Rhynel began to cry. She said she was grateful for his concern and praised Sir Erat as a wonderful lieutenant, praying that he would continue serving with the same devotion. Clenching his fists, he answered with a confident smile that she could always trust him. Watching this, Deon's face darkened. Turning toward the carriage, he told them to do as they wished. Ed grew agitated and called out, asking to accompany him, but his commander refused, telling him to stay and continue enjoying Rhynel's company. Deon climbed into the carriage, settled into his seat, rested his head on his hand, and looked out the window, reflecting on the consequences of killing the hero. As the carriage set off, Rhynel wished him a safe journey. Deon thought back to that moment, needing to clarify. He had not restrained the hero, who was on the verge of exploding, nor had he absorbed the energy from his self-destruction. At that time, he was nothing more than an ordinary hero's companion. Their detachment had gathered in the forest, and as Deon looked over the wounded, he wondered if these were all that remained. They had lost so many. Suddenly, the hero called out to him with a soft smile, asking him to stay. Deon was shocked. "Are you serious?" he asked. The hero confirmed it, explaining that he would finish the battle with a detachment from the Empire. Deon, confused, looked away, wanting to object, but the hero stopped him, placing a hand on his shoulder. He explained that the Demon King was the strongest in history, and he could not guarantee Deon's safety. They also needed someone to return to the Empire and report the results of the battle. He wanted to entrust Deon with this duty, asking him to go back. Deon nodded silently. The hero then asked, "You need to accomplish something while you're alive, right?" Deon looked up in surprise. The hero went on, saying he knew why the hero of the last war had gone on such a journey. He needed higher merit to fulfill his wish. If Deon returned with results now, it would still be a great achievement. After all, if his past merits weren't enough for him to join this mission, what more did he want from the Emperor? Raising his gaze thoughtfully to the sky, the hero asked, "Perhaps power over an entire nation?" Deon remained silent. The hero then turned and set off, promising that they would speak again when he returned. Smiling, he said goodbye, assuring Deon that he would definitely come back. Time passed. Deon sat on a log, wondering how long it had been. Had the battle already ended? He wanted to find out, but his legs wouldn't move. Was it guilt, shame, or fear that held him back? Or perhaps all three? His face darkened as he admitted to himself the truth. A comrade's role was to clear the path and help reach the Demon King. But when he was asked to stay behind, his first feeling was relief. He wanted to live. He needed to survive. He decided to at least check the outcome of the battle. Rising from the log, he pulled up his hood and muttered that if they had won, he would bring them back, but if they had lost, he would report it. Everything should be fine if he only observed from afar. When he reached the battlefield and looked out from the bushes, he was shocked by what he saw. Cursing under his breath, he questioned what was happening. Below, at the foot of the cliff, stood a group of demons surrounding the only surviving person. The Demon King approached the exhausted hero, who had collapsed to the ground. The demons sneered and asked if that was all he had left. It was an overwhelming sight. The hero's body trembled as he struggled to rise, blood spilling from his mouth. The Demon King looked down at him with a menacing expression and asked what his final words would be. The hero simply grinned as streams of wind and radiant energy began to pour from him, swelling into a blinding golden flash that forced the Demon King to shield his eyes. Seeing this, Deon rushed to the edge of the cliff, covering his face from the brilliant light with his hand. He realized the hero was using self-destruction. How would it end? He had to report this to the Empire. Suddenly, a deep, booming voice echoed behind him. It was a massive ogre demanding to know who else was there. Deon spun around, terrified, exclaiming that it was a demon. The ogre raised his sword, calling him a small bug trying to hide. As the blade came crashing toward him, Deon panicked, sweat pouring down his face as curses raced through his mind. The enormous sword smashed into the ground with a thunderous impact, but Deon managed to leap aside just in time. He swore loudly, shouting in frustration at the ogre's wild swings. Once again, the massive blade came down, narrowly missing him by mere centimeters, though it grazed his cheek and left a shallow wound. Taking a firm stance, Deon gripped his dagger tightly. Realizing he couldn't escape at this rate, he needed to slow the monster down. As the ogre swung again, Deon charged forward. The demon attacked, but Deon skillfully dodged each strike. When the ogre's sword embedded itself into the ground, forcing him to kneel, Deon seized the chance. He slipped between the demon's legs, then launched himself upward, climbing onto its massive limb. With a powerful push, he leapt above its head, dagger raised high. Landing with precision, Deon drove the blade into the creature's neck. The ogre roared in pain and fury, calling him a fool. Gritting his teeth, Deon worried the wound wasn't deep enough. The monster reached for him, and Deon realized piercing such thick skin with his strength alone would be nearly impossible. He had to dodge. What should he do? At that moment, the cliff beneath them began to collapse. The ogre faltered, losing his balance, and tumbled into the abyss. Deon, still clutching the dagger's hilt, was dragged down with him. His face twisted with fear as he plummeted, cursing desperately. Moments later, the ogre's massive body crashed into the ground, sending dust and debris into the air. The demons below shielded their faces, one shouting in alarm at the commotion. As the dust cleared, they saw Deon's silhouette sitting atop the ogre's corpse. Covering his mouth in shock, Deon trembled at the realization that he had survived. He glanced at his dagger, still buried in the ogre's neck, and at the spreading pool of blood beneath the body. With no sign of life from the creature, Deon knew the ogre was dead. Perhaps he had survived only because he landed on it. Maybe the fatal blow came from him throwing all his weight behind the strike. But this wasn't the time to dwell on that. He had fallen off a cliff straight into the heart of the enemy camp. Realizing this, he immediately turned around and was met with countless surprised glances from the demons. One of them exclaimed in shock. It was the commander of the 7th Detachment. Who the hell is this person? Why is he so strong? Deon was stunned. He had not only fallen into the heart of the enemy camp, but had also killed the commander of their squad right before their eyes. As he turned his gaze to the side, Deon noticed a demon unlike the others. Standing still with arms crossed, he looked at Deon with open displeasure. Deon thought to himself, "Is this the Demon King? He's looking at me as if he wants to kill me on the spot." Just then, the hero's weak voice interrupted, coughing as he called Deon's name. Deon turned and the hero asked why he was there. He knew the hero was going to self-destruct, so why would Deon come? Jumping off the corpse, Deon approached him, apologizing and saying he only wanted to fulfill his duty. The hero placed a hand on his shoulder, lowered his head, and quietly said he truly hoped that at the very least, Deon would survive. Noticing that the glow surrounding the hero had vanished, Deon was startled. Did he stop the process? Tears welled in the hero's eyes as he thought to himself. Unlike the image the world had of him, he was absurdly kind and loyal. If only this man could become the next hero. With the last of his strength, the hero lifted his gaze to the heavens, asking the world if it was watching. This was his final request, that Deon be allowed to live. He then grabbed Deon by the shoulders, and once more a glow began to emanate from his body. But this time it was different. Bringing his palms together, he pleaded with the world to grant Deon at least a fragment of his power. Streams of golden light flowed into Deon's chest, gathering within him. Deon looked down in shock as the radiance burst into a blinding flash that forced the demons to shield their eyes. The Demon King narrowed his gaze and exclaimed, "This light, it isn't self-destruction. Is the hero trying to transfer his power? But how is this possible?" When the flash finally subsided, the hero's body collapsed against Deon. Staring down at him, Deon thought bitterly, "Fool. He should have known it was impossible to endure the powers of a hero with willpower alone." Yet somehow, he had stopped his self-destruction just to pass on his strength. Carefully, Deon laid the hero's body on the ground and sat beside him, his expression heavy. Covering his mouth, he felt his body tremble. His chest heaved, and he vomited violently, realizing his body could not accept such power. "As I thought, I'm still the weakest." Nearby, one of the demons nervously asked, "What was that?" "Wasn't that man killed by a hero?" another responded. "It looked like it. The hero stopped his self-destruction and killed him. Unbelievable, but he seems to be in terrible agony." Deon lowered his hand and saw fresh blood in his palm. He sighed deeply. "Vomiting blood again. Is it from the fall off the cliff? Not that it matters now. There's no way I can defeat all these demons." Struggling to his feet, he wiped his mouth with a grin. "So this is the end. I really tried to survive." The Demon King looked at him with mild surprise. "How can you laugh in such a situation?" he asked, stepping closer with a curious smile. "What is your name?" Deon met his gaze with an indifferent expression. He didn't understand what the king was planning, but for now, it was best to humor him. He gave his name, and the king chuckled. "I like it." Deon silently resolved to wait for the right moment. When the king's guard dropped, he would escape. But before he could think further, the Demon King extended his hand toward him. "Have you ever considered joining the ranks of the demon army?" At first, Deon didn't even understand what was being proposed. He instinctively agreed in his mind, but then realized what had been said and looked at him in surprise, wondering what he truly wanted. The Demon King told him not to worry about the confrontation between humans and demons. Once he saw what was happening here, he would abandon even the thought of such a conflict. Deon glanced at the fallen commander, then turned his gaze to the hero's corpse. Covering his mouth with his hand in shock, he thought about how he had tried to survive yet never imagined he would live in this way. Remembering it all, he gave a faint grin and looked out the window, thinking that everything began from that day. All residents and visitors of the Demon King's castle, including the king himself, shared a distorted perception of his extraordinary power. Their zeal had gone so far that he grew seriously concerned about his own future. At that moment, Ed opened the carriage door, looked inside, and announced their arrival. The carriage had stopped at the border between the human world and the demon realm, where a tent camp had been established. This was the front line where the endless clash between demons and the Empire unfolded. They were greeted by an army led by the commander of the first detachment. As Deon stepped out of the carriage, he realized he had arrived at the very heart of the conflict. Jakar, looking worn and shabby, extended his hand and said he had been waiting for him. Observing his condition, Deon thought that things must be going very badly here. He shook Jakar's hand, inwardly regretting his choice. He thought he should have refused, but if he had, he would surely have died. From the beginning, he had no real choice. Looking away, he forced a bitter grin, thinking of how cruel life had become. Seeing his smirk, Jakar himself smiled faintly, convinced that Deon's expression had softened ever since leaving the Demon King's castle. To him, it seemed Deon was eager for the upcoming battle. Deon apologized to the commander of Squad 0, which left him disappointed. Yet, with the battle in a lull and no one knowing when it might resume, Jakar believed this was the perfect time to prepare in advance. Deon's grin faded quickly. What was he even talking about? Prepare for what? He asked if Jakar meant his squad, but Jakar clarified that he was addressing Deon as well. He expected him to join the fight the moment the Empire's troops appeared. Horrified, Deon wondered if Jakar truly intended for him to fight. Meanwhile, at the forefront of the human world, in the Empire's barracks, the hero Cruel questioned whether the rumors were true. Was there really a commander of the Zero Squad? A soldier confirmed, explaining that their intelligence reported the commander would be participating in the upcoming battle, which had lifted the Demon King's troops into high spirits since the day before. The soldier attempted to continue, but Cruel cut him off, saying that was enough. Covering his face with his palm, Cruel sighed deeply, thinking about the trouble this posed. Why had that notorious fool come to the front lines? The commander of the Zero Squad Jakar of the Demon King was said to surpass even the first squad's commander, who was supposed to be the strongest among the 12. A nearby officer nervously asked what they should do. Without certainty of victory, the situation was grim. Cruel paused before declaring they would send an assassin. Shocked, the commander protested. An assassin against the commander of Squad Zero. Surely that wasn't enough. But Cruel explained that if the Zero Squad's commander truly existed, this was the best course of action. He had heard incredible rumors, yet none had been confirmed. Perhaps the commander's very existence was an illusion, crafted by the Demon King to boost morale. If they could uncover the truth with just one assassin, it would be a major success. For now, their priority was gathering information. Back at the demon camp, Ed prepared Deon for battle. As he bandaged Deon's hands, he noticed his leg twitching nervously. Deon pressed his lips together, wondering if he truly had to fight. Though anxious, he had never volunteered to be the commander of Squad Zero. If anything, the mistaken belief about his position had once been convenient. People avoided him. But today, the weight of the situation left him indignant. His deputy asked if he was feeling well, struggling to keep the bandages steady as Deon's hands trembled. Forcing a nervous smile, Deon insisted he was fine. Ed nodded and continued his work. Deon then told him not to be so careful, thinking to himself that soon he would simply face the Empire's new hero and venture deeper into the chaos. Ed looked up at him in shock and asked what he had just said. Deon wondered why he was giving him that look, as if he were being ridiculous. It made him feel uncomfortable. Ed exclaimed, demanding what Deon was talking about. They didn't even know when the battle would begin. Deon agreed, and Ed continued worriedly, repeating that the human world was right in front of them. The sun would soon rise, so he needed to bandage him much more carefully. Calming down slightly, Ed added that Deon truly wasn't taking care of himself, not realizing how much he made others worry. Deon thought that it must be because Ed cared about him so much, though he couldn't understand why Ed continued to follow him around without any complaints. Resting his hand thoughtfully against his chin, he wondered what was so charming about him. He vomited blood, fainted easily, and burned in the sun. He was a weak, fragile man. The thought made Deon upset. Why did Ed remain his deputy? Maybe he wasn't a demon, but an angel. When Ed finished with the bandages, Deon extended to him a pair of snow-white wings before destroying the illusion with a smile, saying that now they could wipe humanity off the face of the earth without any problem. Deon thought to himself, of course he wasn't an angel. Ed cheerfully explained that the cloth was specially crafted by the Demon King with magic, allowing Deon to fight freely. It would reflect sunlight and maintain his body temperature. As Ed bandaged his entire face, he noted that as long as the cloth remained intact, it could be reused. Deon sighed, saying he had already heard about it, and even cast a spell so his eyes, nose, and mouth could show through. He thought to himself that the Demon King never tired of boasting. Ed then draped a cloak over him, adding that judging by how uncontrollably Deon used magic, His Majesty must value him greatly. He even placed a spell to keep his vision clear. Deon thought bitterly that perhaps the Demon King was so full of magic that he simply used it everywhere. Yet magic disrupted the world's balance. Demonic magic was limited, and once demonic energy was spent, it could not be replenished. Moreover, it was said that the more energy demons consumed, the faster the hero would appear. Pulling his hood up, he wondered, if the Demon King used magic so freely, was he that confident in his victory over the hero? Though, Deon admitted, it wasn't his concern. Ed announced he was finished. Deon straightened his sleeves, thanking him, though in his mind he thought it was annoying, but also convenient. His expression darkened as a thought crossed his mind. Life was pure agony. But Ed smiled brightly, saying that with Squad Zero and Deon, there was nothing to fear. Since the fragment had invaded the training grounds, everyone in the squad had been training relentlessly. Deon gave a faint smile, thinking he had no one else to rely on, so he would let them take care of him. Out loud, he said he would check the corpse of the 9th Squad commander and look around. Ed was surprised, asking if it wouldn't be better to conserve his strength before the battle. Deon replied confidently that he was already strong enough. Ed watched him with admiration, thinking that Sir Irat was overflowing with enthusiasm. Deon pushed aside the tent's fabric, all the while knowing it was just an excuse he intended to buy time and find a place to hide. But as soon as he stepped outside, all the demons froze, staring at him. He wondered why there were so many gathered here. In awe, they whispered that this was the commander of Squad 0. Another demon, wiping away tears, said that after all their suffering, they finally had nothing to worry about anymore. Deon grew tense, wondering why they would think that. The demons grew inspired, one shouting that this time there was no doubt of victory. He couldn't wait for the next battle. Jar watched the soldiers' spirits rise and smiled, thinking that the Demon King's decision had been right. Deon's mere presence raised morale. Deon froze in place, silently pleading for them not to focus their attention on him. There was no way to hide now. Meanwhile, the Imperial assassin sat perched on a nearby tree, his eyes narrowing in shock as he spotted Deon. Could it be true that the commander of Squad 0 really existed? His indifferent demeanor and the overwhelming pressure radiating from him, even through his robe, proved the rumors were justified. However, the assassin thought, while he might be strong, he certainly wasn't as powerful as the stories claimed. Since he had already confirmed his existence, he could return. But since he was here, he decided to test his skills. He pulled a fatally poisoned dart from his pocket and threw it toward Deon, who at that moment was heading back to the tent. Deon noticed the dart. As soon as it flew close, he immediately ducked, and it passed over him. The assassin was shocked. Did he dodge that? Deon turned his head in his direction, his eyes sparkling. The assassin shuddered, wondering if he had already been discovered. He quickly leapt to another branch and disappeared into the shadows. Meanwhile, Deon mentally cursed, realizing he nearly stumbled over a stone. These fools didn't even clear the path properly. One of the demons called out to him with concern, asking if something was wrong since he suddenly sank. Deon looked up at her, quickly stood, extended his hand to the side, and casually told her he was just warming up. She smiled and said of course, she even felt more at ease seeing it. Deon rolled his eyes, thinking that since there weren't any good hiding spots, it was better not to wander around tripping over rocks and instead just remain in the tent. The demon bowed and said goodbye, while the assassin, watching from afar, wondered, what was that? If he's going inside, does that mean he's safe? A hunch struck him. Since Deon didn't want his subordinates to know about a suspicious intruder, he planned to secretly inform his most trusted people to deal with it. Even though he's the enemy, he's impressive. Is it time to return? But he couldn't confirm the commander of the 0 Squad's true skills with just one test. If he could truly measure them, it would be a great asset to the Empire. The next chance, he decided, would be the last. Inside, Ed was holding a bottle of alcohol and a glass. Looking at the commander in surprise, he asked if he had returned. Placing the bottle and glass on the table, he remarked that Deon had come back so quickly. Deon removed his hood and, with a serious expression, asked if he knew anything about the new hero in the human army. Ed explained that he'd heard the commander of the 2nd Squad was investigating him. Though the man wore a helmet and no one had seen his face, it was well known that his swordsmanship was extraordinary. Meanwhile, the assassin sat silently on a wooden beam near the ceiling, watching them. Ed apologized to the commander, but Deon assured him everything was fine. Still, the assassin grew uneasy. Is he not going to mention me? Why suddenly bring up Sir Cruel? Has he already discovered that I was the one sent here? Deon sat down at the table and, noticing the bottle, asked what it was. Taking a closer look, he realized it was alcohol. His expression darkened as he clenched his fists, glaring at his deputy. So he refuses me a drink, but helps himself here. Seeing his commander's reaction, Ed shuddered. He quickly waved his hands in panic, explaining that it wasn't what Deon thought. He had actually prepared it for him. Deon's expression suddenly shifted. His eyes sparkled with excitement as he asked if he could drink it. Ed quickly confirmed and poured alcohol into a glass, assuring him that since they were on the battlefield, a little drink to calm the nerves wasn't a bad thing. Ed sighed with relief, thinking he had narrowly escaped death. Deon agreed with his reasoning. Ed smiled, reassured that nothing bad would happen since in battle, the commander was free to act however he pleased. Deon lifted the glass to his lips, thinking he was fortunate, but suddenly froze at a sound behind him. He immediately turned around, while Ed stared blankly, unable to see the source. Deon muttered that he thought he heard something. Ed asked if there was something there. Neither noticed that something had just dropped into the glass, subtly changing the color of the alcohol. Deon dismissed it as nonsense, but the assassin smirked to himself. Fool. He was distracted by the stone I threw. Luckily, he didn't notice I had already poisoned his drink. He had added a deadly poison that would kill Deon after just one sip. Deon slowly raised the glass to his lips, wondering if he had heard something. The poisoned alcohol was only a breath away from his mouth. The assassin, burning with anticipation, believed this was the end of the commander of Squad 0. At last, Deon would die. But suddenly, Deon's hand froze. He noticed something. His expression darkened, and his subordinate grew worried, asking if something was wrong. Without hesitation, Deon hurled the glass aside, shattering it on the floor. The assassin shuddered in fear, realizing just how dangerous the commander truly was. Deon's expression turned terrifying as he declared that a pest was hiding among them.